May 18, 2026, PBS released the documentary W.E.B. Du Bois, Rebel with a Cause. Being a lifelong student of history, I felt compelled to watch it, not to glorify him, but to actually see what would not be included. Du Bois was indeed highly intellectual, but he also rode the fence on personal race relations while being remembered as a so-called Pan-African. What I found was what I suspected, and since I won't allow it to go unnoticed, it is expressed in this piece. Review of W.E.B. Du Bois documentary, 9 Things They Didn't Include, by Mbwebe Ajayi. In 2018, I released my 5th book, Who IZ the Boulé, the history of America's first black fraternity and the derailment towards African self-reliance. Du Bois played a vital role in the research for the book, as it was a who's who deep dive into the backgrounds of black America's leaders, questioning where their allegiance and alliances really lie. I found 9 things that were deliberately omitted, simply because it is the history they don't want you to know. I will be using excerpts from my book Who IZ the Boulé as a base reference of these claims, of which I welcome any advocates of Du Bois to challenge. Number 1. He suffered from double consciousness himself. Fact, Du Bois was not perfect and was admittedly full of faults. And although through his works he came up with a double conscious theory, that black Americans experienced an internal conflict from seeing themselves through both their own perspective and the negative prejudiced view held by white society, creating a fragmented self-awareness and a persistent struggle to reconcile African heritage with American citizenship. This is a symptom he as well suffered from. It's not pointed out and should have been a highlighted focal point. The documentary starts out with him saying, quote, "I very early got the idea that I was going to prove to the world that Negroes were just like other people," end quote. While most see this as a universal and simple humanitarian question, the rooted and coded question is, who does he see as the world? It is very clear to me, from my research on him, it was white folk. Adding to his faults, he was scarcely available to his first wife, Nina, stating it had to do with her strict upbringing as a virgin. As damaging, he was an absentee father with his children. His daughter, Nina, once lived at a YWCA while he lived in a lush apartment in Harlem. He vehemently disapproved and blocked his daughter, Yolande, from marrying James Lunsford, a jazz musician of which Du Bois claimed wouldn't make much money as one. Lunsford went on to become one of the greatest jazz musicians ever. Instead, he forced her to marry poet Countee Cullen, a gay man who went to his honeymoon with his best man, writer Harold Jackman. The marriage ended soon after. This was about image, the talented 10th ideology of snobbish bourgeoisie Negroes. He was a privileged man, with his family free for generations in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He did not have the typical impoverished experience most black people had and enjoyed freedoms the vast majority of us could never have. This gave him the advantage of confidence in finding himself in the world, a drive that enabled him to attend Harvard after attending Fisk University. Next, he studied for a PhD at Oxford in Berlin, Germany, in sociology. Ex-President Ruther B. Hayes was head of the Slater Fund, which had money to educate Negroes, but he hadn't funded anyone to date. Du Bois addressed this with Hayes, along with recommendations from his Harvard professors. He got his fellowship in 1892, but was only funded 2 of needed 3 years to complete and was forced to return to America. It is here he became more outspoken of his views and took on self-appointed representation to speak of our plight. Once a supporter of Woodrow Wilson, who was financed by John D. Rockefeller, he pushed for blacks to vote Democrat. Up to that point, most blacks voted Republican because of Abraham Lincoln and his role in emancipating us. Although Lincoln made it clear whites were genetically and intellectually better than us. Du Bois aggressively campaigned for Democrats, a rooted streak that still exists today, as most blacks vote Democratic by default despite having yet to receive a worthy candidate who will address our needs. Yup, including Obama. As a result of his campaigning, upon election, Wilson immediately segregated the entire federal establishment. Wilson even showed the movie Birth of a Nation, the first movie screened at the White House, which Woodrow loved. Number 2, concept of the talented 10th. There's the misconception that our historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, were started by black people. This is not the case. The Illuminati used the Boulé when they started to build these so-called black universities. John D. Rockefeller and Julius Rosenwald joined forces in the financial backing of these breeding grounds of higher training. Labeled the Bush Foundation, Rosenwald joined the Rockefeller Foundation in 1922. Together, they found Phipps, Atlanta, Dillard, Spelman, Howard, and Clark universities, to name a few. As a result, today most likely you will find there's a Rosenwald Hall on each and every HBCU across the country. The overlooked point is this is where the erroneous notion that Du Bois came up with the talented 10th ideology started. In all actuality, Du Bois didn't coin the phrase at all. It was Henry Lyman Morehouse, not Du Bois, who created the term in 1896. Morehouse, a white man, is also who the renowned black college is named after. In my book, I list an additional 12 HBCUs named after white people, including Howard, Fisk, and Spelman. Number 3, NAACP. Where most think Ida B. Wells and Du Bois founded the NAACP via the Niagara Movement, on the day of its founding, Du Bois was the only black executive board member. It was actually orchestrated by Jane Addams, Ray Baker, Haynes Holmes, Mary White Ovington, Edward Russell, Joel Elias Spingarn, Oswald Garrison Billard, Lillian Wald, Inglis Walling, and Rabbi Stephen Wise. All liberal white spies who wanted black people to pursue the path of integration despite the well-known fact that none of them really approved of it. Rabbi Wise and Jane Addams are found to have direct links to the secret society, the Round Table Group. Rabbi Wise attended Oxford University for his postgraduate study in 1881, the same year the Round Table Group was formed. Wise then went on to co-found the NAACP and also the American Jewish Congress, a Zionist organization that supported the European Jewish colonization of what was called Palestine, now the State of Israel. Jane Addams went on to England to learn how to establish the first settlement houses in the U.S. from Toynbee. Addams then went on to co-found the NAACP. Du Bois was the first Negro to become involved with the NAACP after its founding by white leading radicals and spies to control the movement of black people away from self-determination. This was a Rabbi Stephen quote-unquote wise choice from the organization due to the fact Du Bois was a member of the Boulé. Number 4, The Crisis magazine, a so-called black magazine. Marcus Garvey noted, when he first visited Du Bois' office, he noticed the overwhelming absence of a visible black staff. In fact, the Crisis office was full of whites. He was deeply puzzled and, in his words, quote, unable to tell whether it was a white office or that of the NAACP, end quote. Du Bois was the only black person at the Crisis. Interestingly as well, the subtitle that appeared on each edition of the magazine reads, quote, a record of the darker races, end quote. knowing the NAACP was founded by spies and actually spied on black folks, give a deeper, subliminal, yet quite obvious meaning. They're keeping a record on black folk and reporting to who? The Round Table Group. Number 5, Joel Spingarn. Although Du Bois is known for his work on the plight of acceptance of black people here and abroad, it was known, but not highlighted, the company Du Bois mainly kept were with white folk. He was not very social, but Mary White Ovington, a Caucasian co-founder of the NAACP, was one. However, his closest friend was Joel E. Spingarn. What's not revealed is Spingarn, a Zionist and known spy agent with the U.S. military intelligence under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Henry Van Deman, was often noted as the father of American military intelligence. Zionists are a movement for the reestablishment, development, and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel, and established as a political organization in 1897 under Theodore Herzl, later led by Chaim Weizmann, who specialized in sabotaging community operations. These Zionists used anti-Semitism as both a force and a call of action to gain more power in the U.S. In order to do this successfully, there needed to be a focus of hate exclusively on black people and not the so-called Jews. It's said the last straw that triggered them into action was the lynching of Jewish pedophile and child murderer Leo Frank in 1915. After Frank's lynching, the Zionists created the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, to ensure that an organization would be in place where only Jews, their groups, and interests will be protected. Research reveals they went a step further, setting up spy networks such as the Urban League, the NAACP, and others who would take legitimate claims and injustices of people and sweep them under the rug. As a co-founder of the NAACP, in 1914, the ego-driven Spingarn created a medal in his name, the Spingarn Medal, an annual medal honoring the highest achievement member of the NAACP. Imagine that, an honorary award given to black folk named after someone who spied on them. To date, many winners of this medal have been members of the Boulé, including Ernest Just, Carter G. Woodson, Robert Russell Moulton, Charles Drew, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., Bill Cosby, Jesse Jackson, and of course, Du Bois. Spingarn served as chairman of its board from 1913 to 1919, its treasurer from 1919 to 1930, and its second president from 1930 until his death in 1939. Tell me how an organization that has in its name the advancement of colored people not have a colored folk at the helm and instead guided, directed, and instructed by people who actually suppress you. Make it make sense. None of our leaders have yet to dispute or even address this. And if you look at this list of recipients, many are members of the Boulé, the perfect spy. Number 6, Foreign Affairs. Du Bois was an informant, which fit perfectly with being a research educator. One never questions how he was able to afford the many international travels he took, especially when he could not afford to pay his legal fees before he married Shirley Graham Du Bois, an accomplished and somewhat wealthy writer, composer, playwright, and activist herself, who as a child was in love with Du Bois. Du Bois was also the first and only Negro to write for the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR's, magazine, Foreign Affairs. This periodical published a series of his articles in 1925. Another close friend of his was Hamilton Fish Armstrong, who wrote the book Hitler's Reich, The First Phase, and was an influential member of the CFR. Du Bois wrote mainly about race issues and imperialism, but we should also know it should not be a shock to know these white folks would not have Du Bois unless they felt he was that kind of pawn that could protect their interests, as evident in his anti-Garvey rants. Number 7, the Garvey conflict. Of the entire 1 hour and 52-minute documentary, a mere 2 minutes was spent on his views and altercations with Garvey. The contention between the two should be seen as one of the first back and forth public diss records in writing before it was done in hip-hop on record. It's evident Du Bois was envious of Garvey. His Negro World newspaper reached a much larger audience and had a growing interest in Harlem and abroad. Du Bois then goes on a smear campaign to draw attention away from his self-determination ideology. He was quoted saying, quote, "Garvey is without doubt the most dangerous enemy of the Negro race in America and in the world. He is either a lunatic or a traitor," end quote. Along with Boulé member Alain Locke, the first black Cecil Rhodes scholar, publicly defied Garvey by calling him a gorilla and a, quote, "little black fat man, ugly but with intelligent eyes and a big head," was seated on a plank platform beside a throne, dressed in military uniform of the gayest mid-Victorian type, heavily with gold lace, plume and sword, end quote. Mind you, Locke was a homosexual, and Du Bois was perceived to also have homosexual tendencies, and both opposed Garvey's Africa for the Africans movement and philosophy. This attack of one's genetic phenotype is a tactic embedded in Du Bois, Locke, and the like's elitist training of the paper bag and ruler test, starting as early as members of Jack and Jill on up to the Boulé. The documentary mentioned Garvey's meeting with Ku Klux Klan Imperial Wizard Edward Young Clark, with Du Bois calling him to be either locked up or sent home. Whereas Garvey was under constant surveillance by the FBI at that point, Du Bois wasn't. Now ask yourself, who did they see as a threat, Du Bois or Garvey? It wasn't until Du Bois started using similar language of Garvey and Booker T. Washington was he now monitored and later labeled a communist. In 1921, Du Bois organized another Pan-African Congress in London, Brussels, and Paris, only to be rivaled by Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA. Du Bois' entourage included again many whites, one of which, steel mogul Andrew Carnegie, a close ally of John D. Rockefeller and rooted in eugenic oligarchy himself. Carnegie funded Du Bois indirectly, but not as a sustained collaborator. Du Bois applied for and received at least one grant from his philanthropic network, via the Carnegie Foundation, Phelps-Stokes-related funding streams. Du Bois sought support from wealthy white philanthropists, including Carnegie, which to me is like hiring the Ku Klux Klan to protect you from white lynchers. Du Bois, along with the NAACP members, organized the Garvey Must Go campaign and colluded with the U.S. government to set him up on mail fraud, which led to him being deported in 1927. Du Bois was one of the strongest opponents of Garvey and was an instrumental tool in stopping one of the strongest grassroots movements of the last century. What was Garvey's plan? His plan was to take as many Africans from the Americas and start a settlement in the nation of Liberia, and then help this new nation produce and control their own rubber crops and create other industries made of natural resources. Garvey often noted, quote, "If the oil of Africa is good for the Rockefeller interest, if iron is good for Carnegie Trust, then these minerals are good for us. Why should we allow Wall Street and the capitalist group of America and other countries exploit our country when they refuse to give us a fair chance in the countries of our adoption? Why should not Africa give to the world its black Rockefeller, Rothschilds, and Henry Ford?" End quote. This would have potentially meant no Firestone, Goodyear, no U.S. Steel as we know it today, because it would have set a precedent that would make all Africans aware of their land and mineral wealth it offers. This also would have shattered the financial arm of white supremacy right when it was getting started. Ironically, we are seeing the resurrection of the notion in interim President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. While he felt that Garvey's Black Star Line was original and promising, Du Bois was in opposition of complete separation with white supremacy, which in his eyes was an overt admission that black people could never be equal to whites. he made a point to compare his thoughts to how popular the idea was with racist thinkers and politicians. The difference is, Garvey didn't want to be equal to whites. As a result, Du Bois feared Garvey threatened the gains made by his own movement. In 1920, when Garvey led 25,000 of his supporters from Harlem to Madison Square Garden to witness his coronation as Provisional President of Africa, Du Bois was spotted in the crowds, fidgeting and squirming in his seat. When Du Bois was asked to comment on the occasion, he could barely disguise his hate. Quote, "It may be that Garvey's movement will succeed. I shan't raise a hand to stop it," end quote. That's what he said publicly, but behind closed doors, this prompted his investigation and published articles about the Black Star Line in his magazine, which led to Garvey's downfall and deportation. 8. His committed membership to the Boulé. As mentioned, May 19th, this documentary was released. I'm a believer there's a coincidence it was in alignment with May, also being the month America's oldest black fraternity was founded. May 15th, 1904 to be exact. Du Bois was an active member of Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity Inc., aka the Boulé, until the day he died. Yet by design, no one either knows or talks about it. A society full of secrets, it's no surprise there was no mention at all throughout the documentary. However, the presence of the Boulé was throughout. There are at least 3 interview narrative segments of fellow archons, the name they used for member, and Henry Louis Gates Jr., historian, Eddie Claude Jr., PhD, and David Levering Lewis, PhD, biographer. Du Bois was the founding member of the New York City Zeta chapter, and said the Boulé was created to, quote, keep the black professional away from the ranks of Marcus Garvey, end quote. We would not know of this organization without the works of Steve Coakley, who paraphrased the Boulé as, quote, the importance to steal the black professional away from Garvey because an Afrocentric organization that articulated and captured the black professional will give white folks no safe haven in the black community. So the Boulé, the remaking of the house Negro, was necessary to build a group of Negroes who had an investment in protecting the white system as produced by Whitey having stolen this land. This is post-Reconstruction, taking away the articulate Negro, now designed to replace them with organized institutions to keep them away from self-improvement. So we find in the same period as the founding of the Boulé, the founding of the 4 black male Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, and Phi Beta Sigma, and the 4 black female Alpha Kappa Alpha, Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, and Sigma Gamma Rho college-based fraternities and sororities. We also find the founding of the NAACP and the Urban League, end quote. The Boulé was utilized effectively to limit the power and influence of Garvey, with Emmett J. Scott playing a vital part. Scott organized a meeting of all the prominent black newspaper families and editors from the Amsterdam News, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore, Washington Afro-American newspaper, and W.E.B. Du Bois, still editor of the NAACP's The Crisis publication that took place in Washington, D.C., June 19, 1918. That same year, on August 17th, Garvey began publishing the widely distributed Negro World newspaper. In that meeting, they were given Masonic orders to either not discuss Garvey in their papers or deem him persona non grata, so that no one will follow him and his Back to Africa movement. But why? Why would black men want to block another black man's mission of repatriation? The reason is obvious. These Negroes felt nothing was better than what they had currently had on their master's plantation. And lastly, number 9, Ghana, Nkrumah, and the Encyclopedia Africana. Du Bois spoke with the president of Ghana about the creation of a new encyclopedia of diasporic Africa called the Encyclopedia Africana. In early 1961, Ghana notified Du Bois they had approved funds to support the encyclopedia project, and they invited him to come to Ghana and manage the project there. October 1961, at the age of 93, Du Bois and his wife traveled to Ghana to take up residence and commence work on the encyclopedia. The idea of the project was spawned by Daniel Alexander Payne Murray, one of the first black men to work as a librarian at the Library of Congress in 1971. In 1899, Murray organized an exhibit at the 1900 Paris Exposition on Black authors. This award-winning exhibit became the core of the Library of Congress Colored Author Collection. Murray planned to expand his collection and create an encyclopedia of all black achievement. Although he never completed the project, the idea of an encyclopedia was revived by Du Bois. In 1901, he widened the scope of the project to encompass the entire African diaspora. He also suggested that the encyclopedia be called the Encyclopedia Africana, in a similar fashion to the Encyclopedia Britannica. Due to lack of support from the established philanthropies, the project died, but was revived a few years later when fellow Boulé member and Yale professor Henry Louis Skip Gates took over and had the book released along with the digital CD-ROM edition with Microsoft as in Carta Africana in 1999. The second edition, 2005, published by Oxford University Press, a white-owned educational institution, has over 3,500 entries on 3,960 pages. To boot, who do you see as the first picture seen when you open the book? Du Bois. In February 1966, while President Kwame Nkrumah was in North Vietnam and China, there was a coup on his government. Nkrumah strongly believed America played a major role with John Stockwell, former chief of the Angola Task Force of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. He wrote that agents at the CIA's Accra station, quote, maintained intimate contact with the plotters as a coup was hatched, end quote. I emphasize again, Du Bois was one of the closest Americans to Nkrumah. In the end, it wasn't until the Great Depression of the 1930s, the inability to maintain subscribers to The Crisis, which forced an alliance with the NAACP and their new and white executive secretary, Walter White, literally his name, did Du Bois probably begin to see his realization of double consciousness. He began regretting his staunch position of doing for self, Booker T and Garvey promoted, openly reconsidering segregation. Now let's take a tally and look at this closely. Du Bois wrote for CFR's Foreign Affairs magazine, had close relations to Europeans who secretly collected info on black folk under the guise of the NAACP, and was a member of the Boulé's 6th chapter in New York City. He also despised Garvey to the point of degrading his phenotype, a dislike rooted in his hate for Booker T, who after his sudden death, his Boulé brethren R.R. Moulton took over at the Tuskegee Institute from 1950 to 1935, only then for this to be the very place syphilis was injected into some 600 black males as the Tuskegee experiment from 1932 to 72. He later goes to Ghana to work with Nkrumah in creating the Africana Encyclopedia Project, who later fell victim to a U.S. coerced coup. Most don't even know he was also pro-cooperatives, yet oxymoronically an anti-Garveyite. I question the mindset of anyone who thinks he can belong to a spy network and yet have no role in what's mentioned in this paragraph alone. Is his act genuinely that of a freedom fighter, or that of a chameleon spy with an allegiance to his Greek and Euro overseers? Even after being allegedly cast out of the Boulé, he never revealed any names, and from the description of their logo, the right paw of a Grecian sphinx covers up an urn inside this vase as a circle within a circle, or the names of those associated with the Rhodes Rothschild secret society. He took this intel with him to his grave. Du Bois refused to put the plight of African centricity above his disdain for Garvey, or Booker T for that matter. The question is why? But since he is not here to answer, we are left to look at his deeds, which leads to the other question. Was he really African-centered, or was he just continuing his allegiance of spy networking for the Boulé, CFR, and the U.S. government? Since Du Bois never talked nor renounced his membership in the Boulé, had no remorse for his role in destroying Garvey's Back to Africa movement, and possibly what happened at Tuskegee, I questioned the role he played in his latter years befriending Nkrumah and moving to Africa for the Encyclopedia Project. Was he still an agent? Hard to say he wasn't. In my eyes, he was a hypocrite, the perfect chameleon spy playing both sides of the fence, enabling access and even direction to halt the spawn of a movement of black messiahs J. Edgar Hoover was hell-bent on annihilating. About the book, Who IZ the Boulé? The history of America's first black fraternity and the derailment towards African self-reliance. Many of our black organizations today were founded by actual individuals responsible for the intergenerational, mental, spiritual, and socioeconomic conditions we've endured that has had a polarizing effect on how we see ourselves in the world. This book chronologically details the historic timeline of America's first black fraternity and their unsavory quest to be a black version of Skull and Bones of Yale University. Get your copy today at mbwebeashangi.com. Bless.